Okay, we're live, and I'm just going to try and finish Surah 38, Suad or Saad. And as I explained in my earlier video, this is a Meccan surah. This is one of the surahs where Muhammad came to a crossroads. The Quraysh were not being receptive to his message, and it was an increasingly hostile conflict. He was able to preach more or less unobstructed for about a decade. Again, they didn't do much more than scoff or mock his message, but he certainly wasn't persecuted in the way people in Saudi Arabia who are non-Muslim or non-Shia, non-Sunni, and non-Wahhabi are under duress today, particularly if they're Christian. Uh, House churches are raided. It's not, in fact, a diplomatic mission of sorts from from Christian evangelicals was proposed, but um, I'm not sure how far they're going to get because in Saudi Arabia, it's not really legal to basically it's forbidden to have any sort of non-Muslim form of worship, particularly publicly. But he was able to preach up until a certain point where the Quraysh became very resistant, and he was finally forced to flee. But Suad is one of those the conflict in vision between Muhammad and the people he was trying to proselytize, his fellow tribesmen who weren't receptive to this message. And we went over the difference in the Quran in terms of swearing oaths, and compared it to Matthew 5:34 to 38, and the prohibition on swearing oaths, particularly swearing vain oaths. In the Quran, you have Allah swearing by the moon or the stars, and you have Muhammad swearing by the Quran in this surah. And I contrasted that with the biblical admonition not to swear ever, even if it's by whether it's by other men or by Jerusalem or in any case, because it's simply not something that you should do. In fact, in the Old Testament, Jephthah made an oath, a promise that wound up costing his daughter her life, and it's an illustration of the importance of not swearing, not swearing by God. And we went over that, and we went over Muhammad not understanding the difference between tritheism and the Trinity. And if you go down to verse 11, it says, "A host of deserters of the Allies shall be here put to flight. The people of Nuh, i.e., Noah, and Ad and Pharaoh, the Lord of Spikes, rejected apostles before them." Now, the reference to Pharaoh being the Lord of Spikes, this could be uh, there are a couple of interpretations. This could either be Muhammad once again referring to mountains as tent pegs. Basically, he thought that mountains were placed there by God, kind of like you place a tent peg in the ground in order to hold your tent up. And he thought that they prevented earthquakes, when of course that's not what causes earthquakes. Earthquakes are release of energy in the lithosphere, tectonic plates moving over, and in fact, they create mountains. It's not. Mohammed kind of inverted the geological process there, but it could be that. It could also just be a reference to the pyramids. The Lord of Spikes. He could be referring to Egyptian pyramids, or it could be a reference to crucifixion, because Muhammad apparently thought that Egyptians Egyptians crucified people, that there was a form of capital punishment in ancient Egypt whereby people were crucified, which of course is not true. Crucifixion crucifixion is a pretty old punishment. Of course, the Romans crucified thousands of Jews, including Jesus. And Josephus describes two crucifixions that didn't result in death. One of the people wound up dying eventually, and one was able to be resuscitated. But this was because Josephus had intervened directly with the procurator, uh, the Roman governor, and had him take these people down from the cross because they were his friends, and had Roman doctors attend to them before they were completely crucified. And a lot of skeptics of Jesus' crucifixion will point to this to say that Jesus wasn't really crucified, and they'll adapt something along the lines of the swoon theory, which is one of the popular alternatives that Muslims believe in to explain their conviction that Jesus did not die. They'll say he just merely looked like he died, but was really survived. And a lot of people will point to the fact that there were two people, actually one, because the other eventually wound up succumbing to his wounds. But there was one that actually did survive crucifixion, but I have to point out that he wasn't really crucified. He was taken down from the cross and given expert medical attention from the Roman governor and his doctors. So this person was not really crucified. There's no case of a person being crucified and actually surviving. But this is something that skeptics of the crucifixion, and particularly skeptics of Jesus's deity, they like to point to. But it doesn't really add up. It doesn't really contribute anything to denying the crucifixion. But it could be a reference to that. It could be reference to the fact that it could be a reference to the Egyptian pyramids. We really don't know. There are a lot of verses in the Quran that are puzzling. And as I said, Ibn Warraq says that even in Arabic, there is a good quarter of the Quran that's simply not really comprehensible. So you wouldn't expect the English translation to be that much more coherent. But he refers to Pharaoh as the Lord of Spikes. Ad, of course, is an Arabian tribal people. So it mentions Ad, and in the following verse it says, and Samud and the people of Lut and the dwellers of the thicket. These were the parties, and very often you see Ad and Samud joined together, despite the fact that these were two different peoples. One of them living in the Hejaz, which is where um, which is most famous for being the area of the Muslim holy sites, and the Hejaz, it's inside of Saudi Arabia, and the other people were from the Hadramaut region in Yemen, and most people are familiar with this because this was the region where the Bin Ladens came from. Osama bin Laden's father, he was originally from Yemen, and they moved to Saudi Arabia and became these industrial magnates who built everything as Saudi Arabia was ramping up oil production and becoming a modern, at least in the external sense, country. he was employed to build all of the buildings, and in particular, the buildings around Mecca, the minarets, the mosques, the roads, everything leading into Mecca was built by the Bin Laden family, by Osama bin Laden's father, and he was actually a very good. And this was one of the reasons he was entrusted with this. They were very good. He was very good at construction, and in fact, during the siege of Mecca, this is a bit of a tangent, but during the siege of Mecca, when a group of Salafi Muslims, including some Americans, seized the Grand Mosque and basically took over the main places, held it hostage until they were driven out, mostly through the intervention of French special forces. They actually shot missiles or uh, rockets. They basically shot rockets into the minarets and into the surrounding here. Yaroslav Trifimov is a writer who wrote a book about the siege of Mecca, which is really fascinating. I would recommend that. But he wrote about this. They just shot, I think it was either rocket propelled grenades or um, some sort of shoulder surface surface to surface missile or something. They just tried everything to get these people out, to get these jihadists out of Mecca and to retake it for the Saudi regime. And the buildings were resistant to all of this. Were they were actually very well constructed. So it's not it, it it's really a macabre thought, but it's not that. Um, this is why I have to really shake my head at these 9/11 truthers or skeptics. Osama bin Laden knew about construction and how to build things, and consequently, he knew how to destroy things. So he would probably be more capable of taking down something like the Twin Towers than any other terrorist or jihadist. He would probably have a better. He'd be more capable of doing that. Plus, they had the blueprint, which was the first failed attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. But that's a very long-winded tangent. But just to say that that's the Hadramaut, that region of Yemen is where the Bin Ladens are from, and Ad and Samud are basically tribes that existed in the Hejaz and in Yemen. That region of Yemen, they're repeatedly invoked as if they're the same. They're connected in some way, which is just very odd. But the main point I'd like to focus on here is that Mohammed wants you to believe that the disappearance of this tribe is somehow related to Allah's will. And I think he had to introduce this because all of the other miracles he basically purloined from the Bible. It had nothing to do with Allah, but he's attributing it to Allah, saying this is what these people believed in, but it was lost somehow. They weren't really Jews; they were Muslims, but this Islam was lost, and consequently, subsequent to that, the people became pagans, and he's just reintroducing this. So you have biblical narratives that Muhammad appropriated, and you also have military victories, which, as I explained in an earlier video, are not that persuasive. They're not that convincing when you actually look at the military battles, even though they were they were unexpected military victories. They weren't miraculous. So if you leave those aside, there are basically no miracles or no signs and wonders that Allah perform to prove that he's God. But if you put the disappearance of this Arabian tribe, even though he doesn't really provide evidence that this was Allah's work. I mean, there were disappearances of many tribes. I mean, you don't see people. How many times have you ever run into or heard about a Hittite in the 21st century, or an Amorite, or a Moabite? Lots of tribes and peoples have disappeared and become extinct, and you'll find some descriptions of why in the Bible, but other times there really isn't any satisfying explanation. But this is pivotal for Muhammad because it introduces in kind of indigenous element, saying, well, look, Allah did this, therefore he's God. But again, it's not really convincing. He doesn't really provide any concrete evidence that this tribe's disappearance has anything to do with Allah, or disobeying Allah's will. And in fact, the Sabians, who are repeatedly mentioned, one of the reasons they disappeared was because of Islam itself, the Muslim, plus the warfare with the Persians, which the Persian Empire had been declining and declining, and Rome had pushed the Persian Empire basically to the brink, and it was finished by the Muslims. But the Persian Empire had fallen at an opportune time, because this also solidified Muhammad's claim to be some sort of prophet or apostle, even though he was simply appearing at a time where a series of events coincided to bolster the chances of a Muslim victory of Muhammad's followers. But the Sabians were around at this time. They were finished off by a combination of the Persians and the Muslims. But there's no indication in the Quran that Muhammad prophesied that they would be completely extinct by the time Islam predominated in the Middle East. And in fact, the Sabians are actually praised along with Jews and Christians, despite the fact that it wasn't a monotheistic religion, or the Sabian people didn't follow a monotheistic religion. So I just wanted to point to that, the reference to Ad and Samud. This is just, again, Muhammad trying to stamp his imprint on a confected religion that doesn't really have a lot of evidence to support its claims. So he can point to these two different tribes, one in what's now Yemen and the other in the Hijaz region, and say, well, they disobeyed Allah, and look what happened to them. And it says 17, bear patiently what they say and remember our servant Dawood. That's David, the possessor of power. Surely he was frequent in returning to Allah. And again, David was not Muslim. He didn't believe in Allah. He didn't know who Allah was. He was a Jew, and he was of course, the Davidic line is where that's where the Messiah emerges from, the root of Jesse, i.e., David's father. So this sequence is really fascinating because it demonstrates just how far off the Quran is when you compare it to Scripture. So he's going to recount a story about David, but listen and see if you can tell what's off about this. In 18, surely we made the mountains to sing the glory of Allah in unison with him at the evening and the sunrise, and the birds gathered together, all joined in singing with him. And we strengthened his kingdom, and we gave him wisdom and clear judgment. And has there come to you the story of the litigants? So pay attention to this. When they made an entry into the private chamber by ascending over the walls, when they entered in upon Dawood, and he was frightened at them, they said, "Fear not, two litigants, of whom one has acted wrongfully towards the other. Therefore decide between us with justice, and do not act unjustly, and guide us into the right way." So he's going to combine two different things here, and completely misrepresent this story. Surely this is my brother. He has 99 ewes, and I have a single ewe. But he said, "Make it over to me," and he has prevailed against me in the discourse. He said, "Surely he has been unjust to you in demanding your ewe to add to his own ewes, and most surely most of the partners act wrongfully toward one another, save those who believe and do good, and very few are they." And Dawood was sure that we had tried them, so he sought the protection of his Lord, and he fell down bowing and turned time after time to him. Therefore we rectified for him this, and most surely he had a nearness to us and an excellent resort. O Dawood, surely we have made you a ruler in the land, so judge between men with justice, and do not follow desire, lest it should lead you astray from the path of Allah. As for those who go astray from the path of Allah, they shall surely have a severe punishment, because they forgot the day of reckoning. So this is so bizarre. First of all, it combines a story related to Solomon and transposes it uh, onto David, his father. But also, he basically took a narrative, an allegory, uh, used by Nathan, the prophet, and this allegory was told to David in order to illustrate his sin. And of course, he sinned by taking Uriah the Hittite's wife and taking her into his bed, and then having him deliberately killed after she had after she had conceived, in order to blot out his guilt. So I'm going to read from 2 Samuel 12 to illustrate the difference between what the Quran says happened and what actually happened in the biblical narrative. And the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him, and said unto him, There were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing, save one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished up, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It did eat of his own meat, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb and dressed it for the man that was come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Nathan, As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this shall surely die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, Thou art the man, thus saith the Lord God of Israel. I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore thou hast despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight. Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be his wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of his son. For thou didst secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. So he's describing eventually Absalom rising up, and what happened after that, which is David fleeing, and this is the punishment for his sin. And normally for that sin, David would have been put to death under the law, but God had mercy. But the story itself is basically an allegory used to illustrate David's hypocrisy and his guilt, and bring his sin, basically expose his sin. But in the Quran, he takes that and he mangles it to the point where David is deciding between two disputants who 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 have one of whom took a lamb that what one of the other brothers owned. It makes absolutely no sense, and this is one of the problems with the Quran. There's absolutely no context, and there's really no way to understand the stories, because Muhammad basically took fragments from the Bible, fragments from the Talmud, from different targums, from Gnostic gospels, which aren't really gospels, but Gnostic texts, um, and like the infancy gospel of Thomas, pseudepigrapha, stuff like that, and basically just combine them together. And this is why you have things like this, Nathan's allegory being turned into some sort of um, dispute resolution used by David. So there's no explanation of David's sin, of the actual narrative. There's nothing there. Just like in the Quran, you have references to Dawood or David, and there are no Psalms, which makes sense in a way, because if there were Psalms, they 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 would they would Muhammad would have to point to the deity of Christ and to the prophecies that were fulfilled with Christ, but also Psalms that Psalms where David is explaining his guilt and absolving God of his actions, his sins. So I mean, there are a lot of reasons why, but the fact that the David in the Quran bears no resemblance to the David of the Bible, just like Ibrahim doesn't bear any resemblance to Abraham, and Joseph, even though the story of Joseph is probably the most accurately rendered biblical narrative in the Quran, and that's saying a lot. Even though that's the most accurately rendered of all the biblical narratives, it's still completely botched. I mean, you have Joseph lusting after Potiphar's wife, and basically what I got from this series is that Muhammad just put a bunch of random religious works together, watered down a bunch of it, and made it into an incoherent mess. I mean, that's it, basically the upshot of this is that Muhammad was not guided by the Holy Spirit, but he also didn't actually understand or read the Bible, the Torah, the Gospel, the Prophet. He didn't read any of this, and he certainly wasn't. He certainly didn't have any sort of connection to God, and he wasn't wasn't indwelled by the Holy Spirit. So the result is something that you could read, and obviously you understand is not only man-made, it's not created by God, but it's also just completely incoherent. It's just so hard to actually understand who these figures are, the patriarchs, the apostles. It's hard to understand who any of these people are if you just rely on the Quran or Islamic tradition, because they have so many different things. Like when Solomon or David are being discussed, and they use targums, they use rabbinic commentaries on the Book of Esther, or or other books, instead of actually understanding what's in those books of the Bible. You're reading you're reading someone else's kind of mangled interpretation of Talmudic texts. It's not even like reading the Talmud. It's like reading the Talmud sifted through by someone who didn't really understand it, and didn't understand that it wasn't the same as the Torah. It wasn't the actual Bible. It was just commentaries on the Bible. So you have folk legends about David and Solomon just inserted there as if this is biblical truth. It's really bizarre when you actually start to dissect it. So in 32 and 30 it says, "And we gave to Dawood Suleiman," i.e. Solomon, "most excellent the servant. Surely he was frequent in returning to Allah. When there were brought to him in the evening horses, still when standing, swift when running, when there were brought to him in the evening horses, still when standing, swift when running, then he said, Surely I preferred the good things to the remembrance of my Lord until the sunset and the time for Asr prayer was over." So there are a couple of things about this. There was no Asr prayer. There were no five daily prayers. Again, this is something that this could be another video, but something that Muhammad adopted, but not from Judaism, and not from definitely not from the prayers mandated or mandated by the Bible, or the religious ceremonies described in the Torah. So there's that. So in 33, he continues the story, "Bring them back to me." So he began to slash their legs and necks. And certainly we tried Suleiman, and we put on his throne a mere body. So he turned to Allah. He said, "My Lord, do thou forgive me and grant me a kingdom which is not fit for being inherited by anyone after me, nations, semicolon, nations." Then we made the wind subservient to him. It made his command to run gently wherever he desired, and the shaitans, every builder and diver, and others fettered in chains. This is our free gift, therefore give freely or withhold without reckoning. And most surely he had a nearness to us and an excellent resort. And again, this is something Muhammad taking legends. So in this, Solomon is endowed with superpowers, and you're wondering where this came from because it's not in the Bible. Solomon was granted the gift of wisdom because he prayed and asked God to bestow that on him. So he was given the gift of wisdom, and he was reputedly the wisest man, the wisest living man. But he did not have superpowers of the wind or the natural elements. And you, Muhammad took this basically from, again, uh, basically the Talmud and legends and folklore, and included it in the Quran as if this is something revealed by Allah. But you're not going to find this anywhere in the Bible. This idea of Solomon having power over the wind, or being able to, what else does it say? We made the wind subservient to him. It made his command to run gently whenever he desired. So he's basically given superpowers, and this is something that's not this not found anywhere in the Bible. So it continues in 41, and remember our servant Ayub, and this is referring to Job, when he called upon his Lord. The shaitan has afflicted me with toil and torment. And this is true. That part, that at least that line is true. In Job called upon the Lord. Urge with your foot. Here is a cool washing place and a drink. And we gave him, his family, and the like of them with them as a mercy from us, and as a reminder to those possessed of understanding. And take in your hand a green branch, and beat her with it, and do not break your oath. Surely we found him patient, most excellent the servant. Surely he was frequent in returning to Allah. And there are a number of weird things about this. Uh, the fact that Job has is referred to again like David, but there's no context to the story. So Muslims who are reading the Quran and have never read the Old Testament, they will have no idea who Job is. The entire point of the book of Job is, or one of the points is to convey that 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 people are afflicted, even people who are faithful servants of God are afflicted, and it's not a punishment for something that they did wrong. And this is one of the main areas of conflict between the Quran and the Bible. If you look at the Bible, if you read the book of Job, or or even the Gospels, especially the Gospels, when Jesus finds a man who's um, when Jesus fi- when Jesus finds a man who's afflicted with a physical ailment, and his disciples ask him, what sin did he or his did he commit a sin, or did his parents commit a sin? And he says neither. It was This was simply an occasion for Jesus to demonstrate to others um, his power, and the miraculous nature of himself. So the fact that there are people who are deaf or blind or have some sort of disease, that's not a result of something. That's not a spiritual ailment. That's not. They're not. They're not suffering from that because they sinned or their parents sinned. And the Book of Job is great at showing how even people who are faithful, and God says, um, look at Job. He, look at my servant Job. He's perfect. So he's a faithful man, devoted to God, and yet he's still afflicted. But this entire the entire story of Job, which is 40 pages long, none of that is included in the Quran. He simply says, "And remember our servant Ayub," uh, which actually is from the Bible. But then he goes on, "When he called upon his Lord, the shaitan has afflicted me with toil and torment." And it's true, Job was afflicted with uh, boils. His family, his family, his sons were killed, and he was criticized by his friends, Bildad, and his friends castigated him, implied that he was sinful. Uh, so Elihu, Bildad, they all basically raked him over the coals, and it says, "Urge with your foot, here is a cool washing place and a drink." And we gave him his family and the like of them with them as a mercy from us and as a reminder to those possessed of understanding. So he just skips right to the end of the book of Job, where he has a family and he's healed. He's healed of his affliction, and he has a family, and he happy ending. And then it says, "And take in your hand a green branch and beat her with it, and do not break your oath. Surely we found him patient, most excellent the servant." So basically, he there's an epilogue to the book of Job where he beats his wife. And this is the amazing thing is, this isn't even the most bizarre part of the Quran, but it just shows you it's just such a bizarre, weird, unscriptural book. And even the things in here which are taken from the Bible, like this small line, "And remember our servant Ayub," they're followed subsequently by just a bunch of utter nonsense. So in 45 it says, "And remember our servants Ibrahim and Ishak and Yaqub, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, men of power and insight. Surely we purified them by a pure quality, the keeping in mind of the final abode, and most surely they are with us. Of the elect, the best." So the best. This is another interesting thing about, and I can't really go into it because it'll take up an entire video. But basically, the idea of predestination and the elect in the Bible, elect are not chosen on the basis of them being better individuals or be doing something to earn that. Because, as Paul says, if salvation is of works, then you would have something to boast about. You would basically have God indebted to you. You would make God into your debtor. And this is what a lot of people like. And this is why a lot of people are into uh, works based soteriologies, things like Islam or Jehovah's Witnesses or almost any other religion other than a belief in Christ. They like to imagine themselves as being as having God in their debt and salvation. But again, according to Muhammad and Islam, the elect, the people, the Muslims did do something to earn that. In fact, they're superior to other people who don't believe in Allah, and Allah purposely misguides them and purposely leads them astray. Okay, this is getting a little long, so I'm probably going to have to wrap it up. I did not intend to do 3 videos on this subject, but I'm probably going to have to finish this next time. But thanks everyone for joining. Daniel, First Corinthians, El Cid, John. Is there anyone else I missed? All the people watching, and I'll finish up this surah in my